She said something so quietly I almost missed it over the sound of a pot cooling on her stove. 6 words, barely more than breath. The kind of sentence a person only says once they've run clean out of the energy it takes to keep pretending they don't need it. I want to tell you it surprised me. It didn't. Not really. And that's the part that still gets me when I think back on it. I'd known for months, without either of us saying it plainly, that Piper Landry had built her whole life around not needing to say a sentence like that one out loud. I just hadn't understood, until I was standing in her kitchen at 11 at night with a pot of my grandmother's chicken soup still warm from the 2-hour drive. Exactly how long she'd been waiting for somebody to prove her wrong about it. This is the story of that drive, and the year of smaller ones that led up to it. My name is Caleb Reyes. I'm 32, and I've spent the last 9 years as a paramedic out of Cedar Ridge, a valley town of about 6,000 people where the fire department doubles as half the county's ambulance service, and everybody eventually ends up needing you at their worst possible moment. It's a strange way to make a living, showing up for the exact hour of somebody's life they'd least choose to have witnessed. A car wreck on the county highway, a heart that quit at 2 in the morning, a kid who swallowed something he shouldn't have. You learn things about people in that first hour that their own families sometimes never find out. You also learn, if you do it long enough, exactly how rare it is for somebody to show up uninvited for a stranger and mean it. I came by that instinct honestly, and not in the way that sounds noble. I was the oldest of 4, and my mother worked 2 jobs after my father left, and by the time I was 11 I could take a temperature, portion medicine by weight, and talk a feverish 6-year-old through a bad night better than most adults I knew. Nobody assigned me that job. It just landed on the oldest kid in a house where the grown-ups were too tired to catch it falling. I got good at showing up for people, because showing up for people was simply what happened in that house whether you were ready or not, and somewhere along the way I stopped noticing that nobody was doing the same thing for me. I didn't resent it, exactly. I just never learned what it looked like from the other side, being on the receiving end of care instead of the delivering end of it, until a woman 2 hours up the mountain taught me, very much against her own will. I met Piper Landry on a Tuesday in April on an actual call, which I'll admit is not most people's idea of a meet cute. She runs a pottery studio out of a converted 2-story garage in Alder Peak, a small mountain town about 2 hours north of Cedar Ridge, all switchbacks and pine and one blinking traffic light, and that particular Tuesday she'd sliced her palm open on a broken kiln shelf badly enough that her studio assistant called it in as an emergency. Which, technically, cutting a tendon partway through counts as. She was sitting on an overturned bucket when I got there, palm wrapped in a clay-streaked dish towel, giving her assistant very calm, very specific instructions about which glaze order needed to go out that afternoon regardless of what was currently happening to her hand. "You should probably let me look at that instead of running your shipping department," I said, kneeling down to unwrap the towel. "I can do both. I've done both before." She winced as I got the wrap off, but her voice stayed level. The specific level of someone who's decided panic is a luxury she hasn't budgeted for. "Is it bad? It's going to need stitches, might have nicked the tendon, hard to tell with the swelling. You're not doing the glaze order today. I have a show in 6 weeks." She said it like that settled the matter. "You'll have a hand in 6 weeks if you let me finish looking at it now." I got the bleeding controlled and started on the dressing. I'm Caleb, by the way. Usually I lead with that before the hand inspection part, but you were mid-negotiation. Was the shipping order at least a reasonable thing to be negotiating over a bleeding hand? Personally, I'd have led with the hand. But I respect the commitment. That got the first real look out of her, sharp, assessing. A little surprised into almost laughing despite the pain. "Piper, and for the record I was winning that negotiation. I believe you. Ambulance still wins. Come on, let's get you to Cedar Ridge General. They'll want a hand surgeon to look at that tendon." She argued the whole ride down, about the glaze order, about her show, about whether she really needed the surgeon or just a very firm bandage and stubbornness, and I found myself, against every rule of professional distance I'd built over 9 years, genuinely sorry when we pulled into the ambulance bay and I had to hand her off to triage. The tendon was nicked, She got 11 stitches, a hand splint, and a stern lecture from the surgeon about kiln safety that she reportedly ignored within a month. I checked in on her twice over the following weeks, which I told myself was standard post-call follow-up, which was a lie I'd gotten fairly comfortable telling by the third call. By the fourth, we'd stopped pretending it was about the hand. Here's what I learned about Piper Landry over that first summer. Mostly in pieces, the way you learn a person who's spent a long time deciding what pieces are safe to hand out. She was 30, from a small town 3 states over, and had built the Alder Peak studio herself, from nothing, after art school and a string of jobs that hadn't fit right. She lived alone in the loft above the studio with a gray cat named Ash, who hated everyone but tolerated her. She called her mother on a schedule, not out of warmth, in a voice that went carefully neutral every time the phone rang on a Sunday. And she had an ex, Dean, an architect she'd dated for 3 years down in Denver, whose name came up rarely, and always with the same brisk, closed-door tone she used for the mother calls. I didn't push on either of those for a long time. Some things you learn to leave alone until the person's ready to open the drawer themselves, and I'd learned that lesson early. In a house where prying only ever made things worse. Our thing, and it took a while before either of us called it a thing out loud, grew up almost entirely on the phone and across that 2-hour stretch of mountain highway. I'd drive up on my days off. She'd come down to Cedar Ridge for supplies twice a month and always, somehow, ended up staying for dinner. We texted most nights, long rambling threads about nothing, her kiln temperatures, my worst calls of the week sanitized for a civilian audience. Both of us circling the actual questions the way two careful people do, when neither one trusts their own judgment about love anymore. She was funny in a dry, unhurried way that took people by surprise. She hummed while she worked, off-key, completely unaware of it. She kept a cracked mug on her own shelf, first thing she ever threw on a wheel. Badly, lopsided, glazed a strange muddy green. And when I asked why she kept something so obviously broken next to her good work, she said, "It reminds me what happens to a thing that gets rushed before it's ready." And something in the way she said it made me file the sentence away next to Dean's name and the Sunday phone calls, all of it waiting on a shelf of its own. Late June, she came down to Cedar Ridge for supplies, and ended up, as always, staying for dinner, and I found her studying the crew photo board on my kitchen wall. 5 years of Cedar Ridge station crews, arms crossed, squinting into the sun. "You've had the same haircut since 2019, she said. "That's either loyalty or a real lack of imagination. It's efficiency. I don't have time to reinvent myself between shifts." Noted, she tapped a younger photo of me, 26 maybe, standing at the end of a row. "You look terrified in this one." First month on the job, I was terrified. Had a call that week, kid, maybe 7, choked on a grape at a birthday party. I did everything right, and I still went home that night and sat in my truck in the driveway for 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Did the kid make it? He did. Doesn't matter though. 40 minutes is 40 minutes. You carry the version where it doesn't work out right alongside the version where it does. Both live in the same body. I handed her a glass of wine. "Your turn. Worst piece you ever ruined." Client commission. Second year. A wedding gift? Custom glaze? Exact color match to the couple's invitation suite? I rushed the second firing because the deadline was tight, and it cracked clean through in the kiln 3 days before the wedding. She winced at the memory. I had to call them and admit I'd failed. Worst phone call of my professional life. "What'd you do?" Stayed up 2 nights straight and threw a new one by hand. No reference photo. Just memory and panic. It was better than the first, if I'm honest. Rougher, but better. She turned her wine glass slow by the stem. I think about that a lot, actually. How the piece I made scared and honest turned out truer than the one I made careful and on schedule. Sounds like more than pottery. Don't get philosophical at me, Reyes. I've had 1 glass of wine. But she was smiling when she said it. And we sat at that kitchen table till nearly midnight, trading worst calls and worst commissions, both of us circling something neither had named yet, And she drove the 2 hours back up the mountain in the dark rather than stay, which I noticed and didn't push on, because some doors you learn to leave alone until the person's ready. The pattern that told me the most, though, was smaller than any of that. Piper Landry did not get sick in front of people. I found this out by accident in July, when I called on a Wednesday and she answered thick-voiced and congested and insisted, immediately, unprompted, that she was fine. Just allergies, nothing, don't worry about it. And then proceeded to cough through the next 4 sentences hard enough that I could hear it rattling. You sound like you should be in bed. I'm working. The kiln doesn't care about my sinuses. Piper, I'm fine, Caleb. I've been fine by myself for 30 years. I don't need. She stopped herself, hard, mid-sentence, the way you'd yank a wheel off a bad throw before it collapsed the whole piece. Don't need what? Nothing. I need to go check the kiln. And she hung up, gentle but final. And I sat there in my own kitchen turning the unfinished sentence over like a stone with a sharp edge I hadn't found yet. I found out the rest of it in September, from Nora. Nora Castellanos runs the coffee shop 2 doors down from Piper's studio and has known her since the week she moved to Alder Peak, which makes Nora, functionally, the closest thing Piper has to family in that town. Nora also, I learned fast, does not extend trust to men on the strength of a good bedside manner alone. She cornered me outside the studio on a Saturday in September, arms crossed, blocking the door with the specific stance of a woman who has rehearsed this conversation. You're the paramedic, Caleb. Yeah, I know your name. I've heard it approximately 400 times in the last 5 months, which is a lot of times for Piper Landry to say any man's name. So I'm going to be direct with you, because somebody in this town has to be. She didn't blink. Dean was charming too in the beginning. Dean also drove up here plenty. The first year. You know what happened the first time Piper actually needed something from him instead of just wanting his company? Tell me. She had the flu. Bad one. The kind where you can't stand up without the room tilting. She called him. He had a work trip to Portland that weekend, a pitch he'd been prepping for a month, and he told her, I remember this because she told me the exact words. Still can. 3 years later, he told her, you're a grown woman, Piper. You'll survive a cold without me holding your hand. Then he went to Portland. She spent 4 days alone in that loft with a fever of 102 and a cat who does not, whatever she tells you, actually comfort anyone. Nora's arms stayed crossed, but something in her face had gone less armored, more tired. She didn't call me either, for the record. Took me finding out after the fact and nearly strangling her for not telling me. That's the pattern, Caleb. She doesn't ask. Not because she doesn't need help, because the one time she really needed it, the person she'd built a life around told her she was on her own, and some part of her decided that was just the honest truth of things and stopped bothering people with the question ever again. That's not nothing to carry. It's not. And I've watched 5 months of you being lovely and attentive and easy to like, and I want you to understand something before this goes further. Because I like you fine, Caleb. That's not the issue. Her voice dropped, harder now. It's easy to be wonderful for the fun parts. Anybody can drive up here for a nice dinner and good conversation and call it devotion. The real test isn't the Saturday nights. It's whether you show up the one time she's too sick, too proud, too used to being fine on her own to actually ask you to. Because if you flinch on that test the way Dean did, I promise you, she will never let another man close enough to fail it twice. I've watched her build that wall for 3 years. I'd rather you leave now, cleanly, than help her build one more brick of it. I didn't have a smooth answer for that, because it deserved better than smooth. I hear you, I said finally. I can't prove anything to you standing in a parking lot. I can tell you I grew up being the one who showed up for people whether they asked or not, so it's not exactly a stretch for me. But I understand you don't know that yet. You're allowed to keep watching. I intend to. Nora's arms stayed crossed, but she studied me a moment longer, some calculation running behind her eyes. Can I ask you something else since we're doing honesty in a parking lot? Go ahead. Why her? You're a good-looking paramedic in a town full of people who'd fall over themselves for you. There are easier women to love than one who won't admit she needs anything. Why put in the work? I thought about that longer than the question probably expected. Because I've spent my whole life being the person other people didn't have to worry about asking twice, I said finally. The reliable one. The one who shows up without being asked, so nobody has to feel the discomfort of asking. It's a good way to be needed. It's a lonely way to be loved, if I'm honest, because nobody ever thinks to check if the reliable one needs checking on too. I looked toward the studio window, where I could just make out Piper's silhouette bent over the wheel. I think Piper's the first person I've met who might actually understand that particular kind of tired. We're not so different under it. We just built the same wall from opposite sides. Nora was quiet a moment, something in her face going less armored than I'd seen it yet. That's either the most honest thing a man said to me in this parking lot, or the best rehearsed line I've ever heard. I've never said it out loud before tonight. Ask me again in 6 months and I'll tell you which one it turned out to be. Something in Nora's face eased, just slightly, the specific grudging respect of a person who'd expected a worse answer. I intend to, she said, and went back inside, and I stood in that parking lot a long moment turning both conversations over. Piper's unfinished sentence from July, and Nora's whole account of Dean and the flu. And understood, fully and finally, exactly what kind of wall I was slowly, patiently, trying to get invited past. October gave us the studio fire, which sounds worse than it was and was still bad enough. A space heater in the back storage room caught a stack of packing straw around midnight on a Thursday, and Piper, alone, working late on the showpieces, got the fire out herself with an extinguisher before it spread past one shelf, but not before smoke inhalation put her in Cedar Ridge General's ER for observation. Which is how I ended up walking into a hospital room to find the woman I was slowly falling for, hooked to an oxygen monitor, soot on her face, absolutely furious about the ruined shelf, and visibly trying not to be scared about anything else. I'm fine, she said, before I'd gotten 2 steps in. It's precautionary. They just want to watch my oxygen for a few hours. I know. I read the chart on the way in. I've got a badge that lets me do that. I pulled the chair up next to the bed. You don't have to perform fine at me, Piper. I've seen actual fine. This isn't it. Fine, then. I wasn't fine. She let out a breath, some of the performance dropping. The extinguisher jammed for the first 10 seconds. Did you know that? 10 seconds standing there yanking a pin that wouldn't give, watching the straw catch faster than I expected, and my brain very calmly informed me that if this went badly, the first person to find out would be Nora, opening the shop in the morning, and by then it would already be over. Her voice wavered, just slightly. I got it working. I'm fine. But I keep replaying those 10 seconds. She looked at me a long moment, oxygen line under her nose, soot still on one cheek. It's not really about the 10 seconds, she admitted finally. Small. It's what my brain did with them. This is how it goes, I thought. This is the whole story. Alone above a cold garage at midnight and nobody even knows to come. She looked away, fast, embarrassed at herself. That's dramatic. Forget I said it. It's not dramatic. It's the truest thing you've told me in 5 months. I took her hand, carefully avoiding the pulse monitor clip. I would have come, Piper. If Nora hadn't called me the second it happened, I would still be coming. The second I heard, whatever hour it was. You don't know that. I do know that. It's not a maybe with me. It's just what I do. I meant it as comfort. I watched it land as something closer to a challenge, her whole face going carefully unreadable. The wall Nora had described going up brick by visible brick right in front of me. Everyone says that, she said quietly, right up until the actual test. Then give me the actual test sometime, I said, instead of the theory of it. And she didn't answer, because the nurse came in to check her oxygen levels, and the moment closed the way our real moments always seem to, right at the edge of the thing that mattered. November was quiet between us, not cold, just careful, both of us circling something neither had named. Then, the second Tuesday of December, at 9 at night, She called me. Her voice was wrong before she said a single word. Thick, congested, the specific rasp of someone who's been fighting a fever alone for longer than they should have. "Hey," she said, and even that one word cost her something. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just wanted to hear a voice that wasn't Ash's. He's not much of a conversationalist. I've got the flu, I think. Bad one. I'm fine, though. Just wanted to say hi. How long have you had it? Since Sunday. Which meant 2 days already, minimum, alone in that loft. Exactly the pattern Nora had described down to the day count. Piper, why didn't you call me Sunday? A long pause, filled with the particular silence of someone deciding, in real time, whether to keep performing fine or finally set the performance down. Because I didn't want to be the thing Dean said I was, she said finally, so quiet I had to press the phone hard against my ear to catch it. A grown woman who can't survive a cold without somebody holding her hand. I've spent 3 years proving I don't need anybody to hold my hand through anything. It's easier than finding out, again, that nobody will. Piper. I'm 2 hours away with a truck and my grandmother's soup recipe memorized, and I am telling you plainly, out loud, that I want to come. Let me come. You have work in the morning. I have Wednesday off. I planned it that way on purpose 4 months ago in case exactly this ever happened, which tells you something about how long I've been waiting for you to actually let me. The line went quiet, and I could hear her breathing, careful, thinking. That's either the most patient thing anyone's ever done for me, or the strangest, she said, voice thin. Both, probably. Most true things are. This is the actual test, Piper, not the theory. Let me take it. Another long silence. Then, so quiet I almost lost it under the sound of her congestion. Okay, she said. Okay, come. I hung up, and I was in my truck inside 4 minutes. And I had my grandmother's chicken soup, the real one, the one she taught me at 11 years old standing on a kitchen stool, because my mother was working the second shift, and somebody in that house needed to learn how to make something warm for a sick sibling, cooking on my own stove within 20. Because I keep the ingredients on hand year-round for exactly this reason. And I have for longer than I'd have admitted to anyone before that December. 2 hours of mountain highway in the dark, switchbacks and pine and one blinking traffic light, a pot of soup wedged carefully on the passenger floorboard so it wouldn't spill on the curves, and the whole drive up I kept thinking about a boy standing on a kitchen stool at 11 years old, learning to do for other people the exact thing nobody had ever quite gotten around to doing for him, and how strange and right it felt, finally, to be driving 2 hours in the dark for someone who might actually let me finish the gesture instead of insisting, out of old habit, that she didn't need it. She'd left the studio's side door unlocked, which I understood, once I got up there, had cost her something to do. Piper Landry does not leave doors unlocked for anyone. Another small brick in the same wall. I found her on the couch upstairs in the loft, wrapped in 2 blankets, hair stuck to her face, eyes glassy with fever, ash curled disapprovingly at her feet. She looked more undone than I'd ever seen her. No negotiation left in her. No dry humor holding the door shut. Just a tired, sick, 30-year-old woman who'd let herself be caught needing something. You actually came, she said, voice cracking on it, like some part of her truly hadn't believed I would until the truck was in the driveway. I said I would. I set the soup pot on her stove, found a bowl, and started warming it, moving through her kitchen with the specific efficiency of a man who's done this in 100 strangers' houses and a handful of houses that mattered far more. How high's your fever? 101, this morning. Haven't checked since. She watched me from the couch, blankets pulled tight, something working behind her glassy eyes that looked almost like fear, which struck me as strange for a woman who'd just spent months proving she wasn't afraid of anything. Caleb, you drove 2 hours. On your day off. For soup. For you. The soup was just the vehicle. I brought the bowl over, sat on the edge of the couch, and this is the part I want you to see clearly. Because it's the whole hinge of the thing, I didn't hand her the bowl and step back. I sat there, and I fed her the first few spoonfuls myself, because her hands were shaking too hard to trust with a full spoon. And she let me, which cost her more than the unlocked door had. "I don't know how to do this part," she admitted, voice thin, eyes wet now for reasons that weren't the fever. "Being taken care of. I've had 30 years of practice at the other kind. I know. I noticed months ago. The mug on your shelf, the one you keep because it reminds you what happens when something gets rushed before it's ready. I think you've been doing the exact same thing to yourself. Building something sturdy and self-sufficient before you'd let anyone near the soft, unglazed part underneath." I kept feeding her the soup. Slow, steady, no hurry in it anywhere. "You don't have to have this part figured out tonight. You just have to let me sit here while you don't." "My mother's like this too," Piper said, staring into the bowl, instead of at me, voice thick with fever, and something older than the fever. "Not cold, exactly, just careful, distant, in the specific way of somebody who loves you but never learned the words for showing it as anything but logistics. Sunday calls, 12 minutes, always about the weather and my show schedule, and never once about how I'm actually doing. I used to think that was just how love looked in our family. Efficient, contained." She wiped her eyes, embarrassed at the tears mixing with the fever sweat. "I think I built my whole life to match it. Never asking for more than 12 efficient minutes from anybody. Because 12 minutes was all I ever knew love came in." She was crying properly now. Quiet, exhausted tears, the kind that come out when a body's too sick and too tired to keep holding a wall up any longer. "Dean left me alone for 4 days once," she said, thick, flu, just like this. "Told me I was a grown woman. I'd survive without him holding my hand. I believed him. I've spent 3 years believing him, actually. Not about the flu, about the bigger thing under it. That needing somebody is a test people fail. That the smart move is just never handing anyone the test to fail in the first place." "I know," Nora told me. "Back in September in a parking lot, with a considerable amount of righteous fury on your behalf." That surprised a wet, exhausted laugh out of her. "She threatened you." Thoroughly, I respected it. I set the empty bowl aside and took her hand instead, careful of the tissues balled in her fist. "Piper. I grew up the kid who learned how to make soup for a sick sibling standing on a kitchen stool. Because somebody had to, and the grown-ups in that house were too tired to catch it falling to me. I got very good at showing up for people. What I never learned, not once, not until I met you, is what it feels like to be let in on the receiving end of it. So this isn't charity, whatever your fever's telling you right now. I needed this drive as much as you needed the soup. We're not as different as Dean's 4 days made you think." She looked at me a long moment, fever-bright eyes, and something in her whole face finally, fully came down, not collapsed, just came down. Gentle, the way a wall comes down when the person on the other side of it stops being a threat to it. "Nobody has ever done that for me," she whispered. 6 words. Barely more than breath, and I felt them land somewhere I hadn't fully known was still waiting to be reached. Some part of me that had spent 21 years quietly performing the same wall in the opposite direction, showing up for everyone else so thoroughly that nobody ever thought to ask if I needed the same thing handed back. "Then I guess we're both getting a first tonight," I said, and I didn't dress it up any further than that, because some sentences don't need dressing, and some nights don't need speeches. Just a warm bowl, a steady hand, and somebody willing to stay past the point where staying stops being convenient. She fell asleep an hour later, fever finally breaking somewhere around 1 in the morning, and I stayed on the couch beside her, not because the drive was too far to make twice in one night, though it was, but because leaving felt suddenly like the one thing in the whole story I was no longer willing to do. Ash, against every documented preference of that cat, climbed into my lap around 2 and stayed there till dawn, which Piper still cites as the single most damning piece of evidence in my favor whenever the subject comes up. She was better by Friday. I drove back down to Cedar Ridge Wednesday afternoon, badly slept, thoroughly happy, and got a text from Nora that same evening that read, in its entirety, "Passed. Barely, watch yourself, I'm still watching too." Which, from Nora, was practically a wedding blessing. The months after that ran warm and unhurried, which is its own kind of miracle after a year of 2-hour distances and careful circling. I learned the whole rest of the Dean story eventually, in pieces, on her own schedule, same as everything with Piper. The slow unraveling of a relationship built on her constant giving and his constant taking ending, predictably, the exact way Nora had described it. Her mother, it turned out, had her own version of the same lesson. An anxious, undemonstrative woman who loved Piper deeply and had simply never learned to show it as anything but distance, which explained a great deal about the careful Sunday calls. Piper started calling her more, actually talking instead of reciting logistics, once she'd had enough practice at receiving to recognize what her mother had never quite managed to offer either. I brought Piper to meet my mother in February, once she was fully well and the whole story had settled into something we could tell out loud without either of us getting too raw about it. My mother, who raised 4 kids alone on 2 jobs and still runs the same kitchen table where I learned to make soup at 11, looked Piper over for exactly as long as it took to pour coffee, and then said, without preamble, the thing my mother says to everyone eventually. "He fed you soup on the worst night, I hear." "He did," Piper said, careful, clearly unsure which direction this was going. "Good, that's the whole test as far as I'm concerned. Anybody can be charming over a nice dinner. It's the 3 in the morning tests that tell you what you've actually got, and I'll thank you not to make him wait too long before you trust that yourself." My mother set the pot down and looked at her son with the specific pride she reserves for the rare moments she lets herself show it. I raised him to show up for people because somebody had to, and I was too tired most nights to catch it. I always worried that meant he'd never learn how to let anybody show up for him instead. Did he let you? Piper looked at me, something soft crossing her face. Eventually, it took some convincing. It always does. With this one. Runs in the family. I'm not much better at it myself. My mother patted Piper's hand. Brief, warm, entirely without sentimentality about it. "Welcome to the kitchen table, sweetheart. There's always a bowl of something on this stove. You'll get used to it." We moved in together the following autumn. My place in Cedar Ridge, close enough to the hospital for my shifts, with a converted garage bay Piper turned into a proper studio inside of 2 months. Kiln vented correctly this time. No space heater anywhere near the packing straw. Nora drives down for coffee most Sundays now, and still, 11 months later, watches me with one eyebrow permanently raised. Which I've come to understand is simply the highest compliment she's capable of paying a man. The cracked green mug still sits on Piper's shelf. First thing she ever threw. Lopsided, rushed before it was ready. She won't get rid of it. Says it's not a reminder of failure anymore. Then what is it? I asked her once, watching her dust it same as always. She thought about it a long moment, turning the ugly little thing over in her hands. "It's proof I kept working the clay even after the first try came out wrong," she said. "That's the whole trick, apparently. You don't throw out the piece. You just keep both hands on it a little longer. And you let somebody else's hands help hold the shape while it sets." I still make the soup every winter, first cold she catches, whether she's asked for it or not. Because some habits are worth keeping exactly as they are. And every single time, no matter how many winters pass, she says some version of the same 6 words, quieter now, more like a private joke between us than a wound. Nobody has ever done that for me. Except these days, when she says it, she's smiling. That's the whole secret. As far as I've ever found one, some people spend their whole lives being the ones who show up, and some spend it convinced no one ever will, and every so often, if you're lucky, the two of you meet in a kitchen at midnight and finally trade jobs.